If you've been following my channel for a while, you've probably noticed that I do headphone reviews. Actually, some of my older videos, I looked at some other audio creation stuff from an amateur perspective, and whilst I think there's probably an audience for that kind of perspective, I'm not really sure that I add anything special. So I'm probably not going to do stuff like that again, especially with channels like Podcastage and Julian Krauss pretty much nailing that subject matter. So headphones, that's mostly where my passions lie, mostly. And that's where my channel has gravitated naturally, which is kind of where I felt my channel would go when I started it. Now on this channel, I look at headphones and related audio gear, and I tell you what I think about it. I go into quite a lot of detail because that's what I always do before I spend any of my hard-earned cash on anything. But what is my headphone review process? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, it's Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews, and on this channel I look at headphones and audio gear that I might be interested in, and that's where my review process really starts. Is there a product out there that would suit me, my listening tastes, comfort preferences and budget? Is it an upgrade on a product I already own, or a product that fits a niche that I don't yet own? Now some of my purchases and reviews have come from stuff that I found during my own research, stuff that I wanted to look at and find out about. Or maybe it's from recommendations. People often say to me, well, if you like this, then you should try that, and so on. Once I have a new headphone in my hands, I don't do anything particularly special to begin with. I unbox it, I feel the product in my hands, and go through that tactile, shiny new device experience. Sometimes a manufacturer goes the extra mile on their packaging, and that adds a certain something to the experience of receiving that product and experiencing it for the first time. I don't do unboxing videos, but I do make sure to report on the unboxing experience if I think it was particularly special. Although do let me know if you want to see separate unboxing videos, because I can do that. Next up, what I'll do is I'll put the headphone on my head, I'll get it adjusted, see how they feel, and most of the time a headphone feels just like a headphone. However, sometimes comfort issues are immediately obvious, such as clamping force and ear pads. Now others take a little while before comfort can be truly judged. And so I just start by using the headphone. I listen to my usual favorite music, I watch movies, I play video games, and everything else that I normally do with a headphone. And I just experience owning that headphone. Now, I might continue to do this for weeks or months. Sometimes it takes a while to really get to know a headphone, and sometimes just a few days. And sometimes they fall apart within a week of ownership. Now, with the AKG K712 Pro I reviewed last week, that took me a little while to understand its frequency response from listening, but just a few minutes of gaming to really appreciate the openness, the soundstage, and the imaging that makes them a great gaming headphone. And the same goes for the Beyerdynamic DT1990 Pro. It took just a few minutes of listening to recognize the incredible analytical detail, but much longer again to get a feel for the overall sound signature. I've owned those for a couple of years now, I think, and I should probably get around to reviewing them. At some point when I feel comfortable that I understand the headphone enough, I start more specific testing. I listen to my playlist of reference tracks, which includes songs from several different genres, including rock, metal, jazz, EDM, and hip-hop. And actually, if you have any tracks to recommend me for my reference tracks, then leave them down in the comments and I'll add them to my playlist. As part of this listening test phase, I bring in a couple of other headphones for reference and comparison. My reference headphone is the Massdrop Sennheiser HD6XX, which I often just refer to as an HD650 because that's basically what it is. This is my control or reference point against which I can measure all other headphones. The HD650 is ubiquitous, it is well known and highly regarded, and it is one that I really understand fairly well. Being able to compare the sound signature of any headphone against one that I know really well helps me to understand the new headphone signature and also helps me to describe it. I usually also bring in another headphone as a point of comparison. Now this will usually be a similar headphone from the same category or price point, and that allows me to judge the headphone against its competition. Most listening is done from my PC using both Spotify and FLAC files through a Massdrop Grace O2 SDAC combo. I think this represents a good quality DAC and amp that is as transparent as possible. Now, just like the HD650, the O2 headphone amp design is ubiquitous and for many years was the standard for affordable headphone amps. Now, there are probably many others out there that best it, even affordable amps like the Atom, which could be argued as the spiritual successor to the O2. However, despite its age, the O2 is still a superb design that is ideal as a reference point. In terms of the DAC, the Grace S DAC is a well-regarded DAC for its price, and again represents a good benchmark point. In fact, the Massdrop O2 S DAC combo is an excellent little package that I highly recommend for anyone starting out in the hobby that wants a good amp and DAC in a single package. Now, sometimes listening is also done from my phone, particularly if I'm reviewing an IEM or if the headphone has been designed with portability in mind. My current phone is the OnePlus 6, which doesn't really have a particularly good headphone amp in my opinion, but this does give me a good judge on how easy or difficult a headphone is to drive, and if I can detect any coloration of the sound from a less than ideal amp. I listen to each of my reference tracks going backwards and forwards between the new headphone, the HD650, and the other headphone. And I make notes about the differences between each one, which was the most detailed, which was warmer, which had a better sub bass, and so on. What does each one excel at? What are its weak points, etc. Now, I might do these listening tests more than once over several days, depending on how long it takes me to understand what I'm hearing. And I also often do some specific listening tests using a sine wave sweep from 20 Hz to 20 kHz, or actually more like 14 kHz with my old ears. Now, this can often point out certain frequencies that are elevated or recessed. Sometimes a spike might appear in a graph that isn't particularly audible, and it's good to have this to reference against measurements. Now, next up, I usually take a measurement with the mini DSP ears. I measure at least 5 times per side, taking the headphones off of the rig and then reseating them in between measurements. And I discard the wacky results that might have come up due to external noise or incorrect placement of the headphone or lack of seal. Now, some headphones are really quite difficult to get a good measurement from, and this process can take quite a while. Now, I average the results of each side and then also create a graph of both sides averaged together. So the end result is that I have a left and right measurement, each made up of 5 separate measurements, and an overall measurement made up of the average of at least 10 measurements. I also usually look up graphs from other places like Inner Fidelity, Oratory 1990, and Ratings, for example, and I can then compare them to my own graphs and my listening tests. This combination of normal daily listening, directed listening, sine wave sweeps, and multiple measurements helps me to form both an objective and subjective opinion on these headphones. Now, bearing in mind that no one can be more objective than their own human failings and experience will allow, I do aim to provide the most objective view as I can, but also present my subjective feelings about any headphone whilst making clear my subjective preferences. And I think that's all we can do as reviewers. So right about now, I'll be ready to write up my review, but first I scour Reddit and various headphone forums to get a general idea of how the headphones perform in the real world. Oftentimes there might be QC-related issues, such as unit variance, that I'm unable to detect, having listened to only one of any particular headphone. If there are a fair few reports of QC issues, I do make sure to note that in my review. And now I'm ready to write up my review. So I put the headphone on that I'm reviewing, I put on some music, and I just start at Word and start writing. The first draft of my review is written in a script style so that I can follow it for recording my video review. Later on, I clean it up and make it presentable to publish on my blog, which you can find at wheezy.reviews, which I'll put a link in the description for. I usually start with building comfort for my reviews because, to me, I think this is one of the most important aspects of any headphone. Now, if it's the best sounding headphone ever, and I can only tolerate it for 20 minutes, then it's useless to me, especially as I'm often sitting at my desk wearing my headphones all day. Now, I know many people out there are going to disagree with me on that, but that's all subjective. And actually, here we need to take a detour and talk about subjectivity, the role of any headphone, and what actually makes a headphone good, and why objectivity isn't always right. I have 2 great examples in mind. My recent review of the Sony WH-1000XM3 attracted some comments along the lines that the sound is absolutely the most important part of a headphone, and that if I think otherwise, it is only because I don't know what I'm talking about, conveniently forgetting that one of the greatest things about the XM3 is the noise cancelling that allows you to sit there with no music playing and still cut out significant background noise, which is something that I value very highly in those headphones. Not to mention its great battery life, its portability, and its comfort. Now, is audio fidelity important? Of course it is. Is the audio quality of the 1000 XM3 objectively good? Well, not especially, but that's fine. It's secondary to features in that kind of device, in my subjective opinion. You can disagree with that, and that's subjective too, but that doesn't make my subjective opinion on that any less valid. I can say similar things about the much maligned Audio-Technica ATH M50X as well. One of the most respected headphone reviewers in the industry, the now retired Tile from Inner Fidelity, gave the M50X a glowing review and said it belongs on the Wall of Fame. Yet you'll find very few people these days willing to admit they actually like the M50X. I did a whole video on that headphone if you want to check it out, but put simply, it does being a monitoring headphone very well. It does being a portable headphone very well. It also sounds a heck of a lot better than the average high street fare and gaming headsets. It's actually really clear to see why it was so popular when it launched. But is it objectively a good casual headphone? Not especially. But does that mean that people cannot like it? Absolutely not. Actually, I have a bonus example as well, the Philips Fidelio X2 Hr. My review of these was rather critical. I thought that objectively they were rather flawed, and subjectively I didn't really like them. But despite leaving room for people to have their own subjective preferences towards it, that video is my most disliked video to date. I also attracted a number of vitriolic but now deleted comments towards my opinion on them, which seems a bit of a heavy-handed response to someone saying they didn't like a thing. One of my biggest gripes is actually with elitism and gatekeeping within the hobby, and I really try to stamp that out wherever I see it in my comments section. I'm not looking to foster that kind of community because ain't nobody got time for that. So with all that said, I try and keep all of this in mind when I review a headphone, and I try to bring a balance of objectivity and subjectivity with my reviews. I try to focus on all the areas of the headphone, what it's good at, what it's bad at, whether I personally like it, and hopefully you'll find that review useful. Now, I'm always tweaking and refining and improving my review process as I learn and grow as both a listener and a reviewer, but this is, in essence, my current headphone review process. And with that, I think that's it. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then consider subscribing. And if you want to support the channel, if you check down in the description, there'll be some links for how you can do that. And I'm going to have a lot more content like this coming out soon. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, have a good one.